Good evening. I'm making this video because I wanted to speak in dissent of some legislation that is pending in the state of Massachusetts. And that would be House Bill 1367 and Senate Bill 876, an act to maintain stable housing for families with pets. And I really do believe that that title is misleading. This act would allow dangerous breed dogs in Section 8 housing and essentially raise insurance rates for everyone who does have a pet. And I think it would also subject landlords to greater liability. So what this will do at the end of the day is allow pit bulls everywhere. Now, at the meeting in October, there was a hearing, and it was a long hearing for housing. There was a section of the hearing dedicated to this act. It's about 48 minutes in total. I will have a link to that, which I posted on my YouTube channel. And everyone who spoke out that day was pro-bill. Like, these are all pit bull lovers. They just love the dogs, the dangerous breed dogs, and they're just like, there won't be any problems, and we should do this, and it's all great, and they throw some statistics and garbage and nonsense, facts and science. The reality on the ground, though, is much, much different. Can anyone imagine what it would be like if, where you have Section 8 housing, you're going to have people with a lot of children. Those children are going to run around outside. You're going to have elderly who are walking down the street. You're going to need people who are going to rely on public transportation, like a bus. And that means folks are going to be waiting at bus stops. And with dangerous breed animals like pit bulls, we already know that they have a propensity for escaping and attacking. Now, I don't want to sound alarmist. Only 30 to 50 people each year are killed by dog maulings. And although the majority of those killings are from pit bulls, but also other breeds, the main victims of these dangerous breed dogs tend to be other people's pets. Go down to any dog park and talk to some of the dog owners out there. Ask them what their experiences have been with pit bulls, if they like pit bulls. You're going to have a lot of people who are just scared for their dogs because these dogs were bred for fighting. That is what they love to do, and so they will go after other people's animals. And then one of the other issues with the dogs is that when they bite people, and that does happen far too often, is that they are very, very damaging. You've got people who have lost limbs. You have other folks with nerve damage. This is not like being bitten by a chihuahua. This is a significant level of violence and danger, much higher than most dogs. There should actually be restrictions on the animals, not loosening of the laws. And when the people were speaking at the conference, and I generally don't comment on people's physicality, I would have you note, though, that there was one man who could barely sit down in his chair and then once again barely stand up. And he was the individual who he said he had a service pit bull. And some of these people, right, these are strong, powerful animals. If they were to go out of control, these folks would not be able to restrain their dogs. And this is like common. We see this happen a lot with these dogs because they have zero economic value. They're given out for free from the shelters. They're like candy, basically, because the shelters are just jam-packed with them. Every shelter in the United States probably has about 50% pit bull and pit bull mixes. People, they get the dogs as puppies, and they're like, oh, cute puppy. And a lot of folks, they don't have experiences with what a dog should be or normal dogs. And then by the time the dog hits the magical age of 2, which is, I guess, its teenage years, that's when its natural instincts start to kick in. And then families who have other pets in the house or small children, they can't keep the dogs anymore. It's too much of a risk. And so they get returned to the shelters. And sometimes you see sheltered dogs being brought back 2 or 3 times. And then the dogs are warehoused there in some instances for years, which is actually quite cruel in my estimation. So there are just all these reasons why I personally think it's going to open the state of Massachusetts up to liability. I can't tell you how many people, if you just go talk to people, they will tell you that they have had run-ins with the dogs. If you go for a walk in a bad neighborhood, you'll know what I'm talking about. You don't have to take my word for it. Like, ask yourself, why would the insurance companies prohibit the dogs entirely, right? Go talk to the insurance companies. They're unbiased. They didn't just throw a dart at the board and be like, we don't like these dogs. Now, I know some of the speakers said that this has to do with racial discrimination, things like that, and it affects Black and Latino families. If we're going to have Black and Latino families in subsidized housing, well, we obviously want their families to be safe, but we want the families of their neighbors and people in their community to be safe along with them. Not to mention if we were to make this legal, right? Like where they can go and get a pit bull because these, if you're in subsidized housing, you don't have a lot of money. One of the speakers mentioned that there weren't veterinarian facilities or dog grooming facilities or things like that in low-income communities, and that's because pet ownership is not cheap. There is a cost to that, and considering the cost of the dogs is zero, we are basically talking about giving pit bulls to Black families with children, and I think that is a terrible, terrible idea. Personally, that offends me. But The idea is not for people to go into public housing and stay there till the day they die. The idea is to give families a break from high inflation, maybe with shelter costs, where people can improve their skills. You know, they can go back to college. They can kind of drag themselves up the economic ladder. But if they are burdened with a dangerous breed dog, they will have significantly harder times trying to find a place to live, because like any sort of landlord, any apartment complexes, they don't want the dogs. One of the speakers mentioned that only about 7% of subsidized housing was pet friendly. I can assure you that that number will go down, right? Because if you prohibit landlords from discriminating against animals that are a clear liability risk, then what's the alternative? Simply just don't allow dogs at all. And then it becomes more expensive, more prohibitive. It just goes on and on and on. And I want to mention too, thinking back to that animal, that gentleman who had the service pit bull, I can't tell you how many times I've heard the service pit bull thing. Like, I don't think there are only like maybe a handful of pit bulls in the United States that are actually considered service animals, really. So many times you hear stories about somebody who's in the supermarket with their service pit bull. It's got the vest on. And then you have an individual who is blind and has a $40,000 or $50,000 dog. And guess what happens? That dog gets mauled. And in too many instances, these individuals who have these service animals are judgment proof, and there is no judgment. There's no justice. Same thing for people at the dog parks, right? Like if their dog gets tore up by a pit bull or something, well, the best you will get is the property value for your beloved pet's life. So I encourage the legislators to get out there and start talking to people, and don't just listen to these folks who are primarily concerned about the dogs. Let's be concerned about our community. Let's be concerned about Black children. Let's be concerned about elderly individuals and folks who want to walk down the street without fear of somebody's pit bull getting loose and mauling them. And it's just over and over. Google the news. Like, it's ridiculous that I even have to make this video, but here we are.